Die Zukunft Deutschlands liegt in den Händen seiner größten Generation. Meine Freunde, das sind Sie! Darum auf in den Kampf! Für Kaiser, Gott und Vaterland!
I think most of us have had this one thought cross our mind until now. My life is horrid or incredibly monotone. Maybe I should join the army, eh? While there's been many anti-war films or anti-war figures in pop culture and cinema, the question still lingers. And most people who make that leap of faith, either with realism or optimism, do get to find out the reality of it. I think whether it's cathartic or dreadful, these people do at least discover some philosophical and often painful revelations about themselves. But why is this proto-absurdist desire so enticing for many? Well, I, like many young people, was at one point drunk on the fantasy of fighting a war, fighting for my country, fighting like the ones before me, who saw the battlegrounds of the Soviet Union, who marched against the Austro-Hungarian Empire with a greater purpose of national unity and liberty. But in hindsight now, I think there's two types of soldiers. The first one, moved metaphysically by the propaganda machine or a blind pride on the glories of the past, a naive and youthful person who is dealing with what the Danish philosopher Søren Kierkegaard called a despair of ignorance, or the aesthetic stage, where one lives for the pleasure, distraction, and beauty. Obviously, this lifestyle can and does lead to a lifestyle of boredom and despair, because it lacks grounding or purpose. Kierkegaard was the one who really launched the philosophy of existentialism and absurdism. In a landscape where the academics like Hegel and Schopenhauer were concerned with complicated and highly complex explanations of will, time, and other abstract philosophical concepts, Kierkegaard was a man who looked around at his contemporaries and felt bemused. Not because they were wrong, but because they were comfortable. He lived in a society drunk on certainty, rational systems, moral order, and religious formalities. Yet, he saw people who were spiritually and existentially numb, people who ticked all the boxes, but never truly lived. In a world full of answers and theories, Kierkegaard asked the question that couldn't be ignored. What does it mean to be a self? But he didn't want to explain existence. He wanted to feel it, to wrestle with it. And what he found wasn't peace or clarity, but paradox, despair, and absurdity. But within that darkness, he also found something else, the possibility of becoming real. But what about the other soldier? Well, I think as a concept or stereotype or whatever you want to call it, we are also familiar with this one. But I think there's two sides of this coin that exist. The one who joins the military fully knowing and expecting of what's awaiting him, who might get shaped by war but ultimately remains almost the same at their core, and the one who joined the military as did the first archetype of soldier and returned from war cold and driven by the id. This soldier either goes through a despair of weakness or a despair of defiance, as Kierkegaard would suggest. Paul Baumer, the protagonist of All Quiet on the Western Front, embodies what Kierkegaard would call the despair of weakness, a condition where one becomes aware of their inner collapse, but lacks the strength or vision to overcome it. Initially filled with youthful nationalism and trust in authority, Paul's experiences in the trenches slowly strip him of meaning, identity, and faith in any higher purpose. By the latter half of the story, he drifts through war as a hollow shell, aware that the self he once was, the student, the dreamer, the son, has vanished, yet unable to construct a new, authentic self in its place. When he visits home, his alienation is complete. In the novel, he can no longer relate to civilian life or articulate what the war has done to him, while in the film adaptation, he slowly dies in the final moments of the movie, a thick coat of mud covering him, showing how the war has stripped him of all that he once was or might have been. This numb resignation is classic Kierkegaardian despair, not a dramatic breakdown, but the quiet suffocation of a soul that knows it has lost itself and that no longer believes it can be found. On the other side of the coin, you have a figure like Thomas Shelby from the Peaky Blinders, a decorated war veteran and a hero of the First World War. He exemplifies what Kierkegaard calls the despair of defiance, the condition in which a person is fully aware of their despair, but chooses to define themselves in opposition to any higher power or external meaning. Rather than to submit to vulnerability or faith or the possibility of healing, Thomas asserts complete control over his identity and fate. He doesn't flee from the void of existence, he embraces it and bends it to his will. He fills it with power, wealth, and calculated detachment instead. His trauma from the war and the deaths of those he loves don't break him passively. Instead, they harden him into a man who refuses to be shaped by anyone but himself. He builds an empire, manipulates institutions, and rejects God repeatedly, not because he doubts, but because he won't kneel. This defiance gives him a cold, resilient strength, but it also isolates him entirely. To Kierkegaard, his refusal to ground himself in anything beyond his own will is not heroic. It is the most dangerous form of despair, the illusion of self-mastery masking a deeper, eternal dislocation that becomes evident through his more and more erratic behavior. His continuous pursuit of defying authority, defying God, and ultimately defying death itself leads him down this path where pursuit of material wealth and defiance is the only thing that keeps him from breaking down completely. When he does try and take a break in the series, it becomes evident that his purpose came at the cost of not being able to steer away from it ever, numbing himself with drink and other physical desires that ultimately do not offer rest to his soul. Even Private Joker from Full Metal Jacket is a fantastic example of the despair of defiance, but also despair of irony, shielding himself from reflection and drowning himself in satire and irony, and ultimately living in it. Even when he kills at the end of the movie, which is supposedly a moral moment, it's not clear if he's acting from conviction, duty, or numb pragmatism. He walks through the burning city, singing the Mickey Mouse Club theme, a final image of detached performance in the face of horror, not becoming or realizing more of the self. But how does Kierkegaard offer peace to oneself? Well, he doesn't say don't be in despair, but rather start by realizing who you are and what he calls a leap of faith. I'm not gonna bore you with some complex explanation, but for Kierkegaard, the answer lies in surrender, not to doctrine, but to something beyond the self. His answer basically lies in theology and God. In Fear and Trembling, Kierkegaard writes about the biblical story of Abraham, who is told by God to sacrifice his son Isaac atop Mount Moriah. But in the last moment, God spares his son and replaces him with a lamb. Abraham's faith is absurd. He acts against ethics, against reason, and yet does so with complete trust in the divine, that the divine will bring his son back somehow. He becomes the knight of faith, as Kierkegaard calls it, someone who surrenders everything to the infinite and still believes he'll receive it back. An ultimate purpose and sense of purpose that can only be translated today as the thought of eternal heaven after death, in spite of possible uncertainty regarding it. But how does one cope with death and despair on a secular level? Well, I've tried finding that out before, through Camus, Sartre, through Nietzsche, and other scholars. But the truth is that we can't have a set-in-stone, rationalist answer. We may never find one rational answer to the question of why to live. And maybe we're not meant to. Kierkegaard wouldn't give you a clean solution either, but he would say, begin by realizing that you are in despair, and then have the courage to become a self anyway. Whether or not you believe in God, the leap of faith might still be possible. Not faith in heaven, but in meaning, in connection, in the idea that there's something real waiting on the other side of your fear, if you stop running around and choose to live honestly. Before you join a system that might hollow you out like the military, try facing yourself first.